So they're older normally, but we teach them from the get-go of where's the power port on a computer, how do you plug it into the wall or into the port and the jack, and then how to turn it on. We're also building what a power button looks like. So we're all comfortable with this, so we understand all that. If the computer, sure, you can boot it up and do what you need to do, but they've never been online before. Most of them don't know really what the internet is. They've heard about it, seen it on TV, that's about it. So we literally take it from that basic level, that building block of plugging it into the power, to getting online, creating resumes, and helping find jobs. So we're doing that every year. We're pretty successful at it. We have a lot of pretty successful. We only hire vets. So you heard me say use the term cadet. I'm a Marine. Most of the guys that work for me are Army, Navy, and many different ships. Actually, more Marines joining me soon. So we're up to 9 employees now. 10, actually, but 9 full that'll work here. What we do is we help them get IT skills so they can get a better job. So one of my guys is now there in Fort Lee, was working help desk. He says he's getting promotion on the triple he's getting promotion too. If you get a chance to talk to him. Another guy working at DOD that came out here as a safe federal employee. So they literally come from living in their cars or worse to getting a job. And then recycling. You want to take the food when you're done here tonight, it'll take 10 minutes max. I'll show you the facility. We recycle about 325 tons, and the numbers are all keeping our landfill. Anything from, as I showed Ivan a few minutes ago, anything from server router switches, racks, wiring, laptops, desktops, anything but appliances, TVs, CRT monitors, and printers. We take anything else. And what that does is it helps us with the bottom line. It's not a tremendous amount, but I'm a granddad, and I can walk the world to be a better place for my kids, as I have. I hope with my two daughters. Any questions? That's quick. Yes,
current situation for the recycling things, where does, and probably once you break down the different things, where does some of it end up, or get reused or just disposed of properly? Or
so we use R2 certified, and that's what we get that. That's our guns. But and go down the hallway, or you can come out there and come up this way you like. We use R2 certified recycling. So it goes to a place where the EPA knows what they're doing. We don't ship it overseas. We don't allow the Chinese, the Indians, or the Malaysians or anybody to melt it down and stand. That's not what we do because some folks might not realize it. Most people are newly educated. All the drinking water is the same. It came from the same spot. It's going around the ground and it's just being used all over. So we believe in that, and we don't allow it to go to places that do the wrong things. All right. So we would love to have your support. We have the Hacker Troops coming in November. ISC Squared is sponsoring now. And we're looking for corporate sponsors. So if your company does anything cyber, why would I say that? Because all of you guys are cyber, right?
One way or another.
One way or another. You have some sort of something involved in that. And we'd love to have your support on that. Right? We have a corporate dinner on November 5th at 10 p.m., which is in the West End. We have the Regency. We have Jason Redmond, a Navy SEAL, who was shot 7 times in the arm and in the face. And he's got an amazing story to tell us about leadership, perseverance, and some Navy SEAL stories there as well. So he's going to be speaking at our engagement on Saturday the 9th. Is the Hacker Troops events. They all have tons of challenges and have a great time. So any questions about that, you can ask Chris or Ivan or on the advisory board. And
We spoke about Hacker Troops, right?
Yeah, just did. All right. Any questions on what we do, how we do, where we do, what we do? Is there a line in there? Why we do? Nothing. Okay, good.
General funding, is that donations or programs or what do y'all have to support?
So, like financial or financial support, we're actually have to hire a grant writer. So we'll probably start hopefully getting some grants soon. But the main support of ours has come from Altria, which actually helped us create this room. And amazing. They did really good. And the rest of it comes from donations online from Hack the Troops. We actually do pretty well with Hack. When I say pretty well, last year we cleared about $19,000. So that's not bad after all is said and done. I'm sure we hope to be good.
Especially when you consider that it was put together by students that were members of this chapter. So
yes,
high school
Ben
students.
and Nick and Vince and Erwin were the students that put that together while Ben and Nick were still in high school. So they came to me with Scott Steinrock. You guys all know Scott? Lobo Spartan, maybe.
So,
Yeah, Scott came to me with them in tow one afternoon. Literally met him out the hot door out there, and we had probably 1,500 square feet at the time. He's like, we want to do this for you. Jeffrey's all Haskell troops. I had no idea what it was. I was just like, cool, go do it. Tell me what you want. Anything for me, go do it. So we get server driver switch, so we get all this stuff. And they're like, we'll take all this, we'll do all this, we'll make all these challenges, we'll do it. It was cool. We cleared 9
the first year.
We had 13,000 donations, financial donations. We cleared 9. The next year we did 23, cleared 19. This year I'm hoping to be at about 50 and clear 46-ish, somewhere in there. I mean, because thanks to me, we use the Whole Street Technical Center, which is free. We're a nonprofit. We could use that for free. And we have all the gear we need. You take a tour with me. I don't even open the doors and you're blown away by what we have. We have gear. We have a lot of gear, and it's for sale. So if you want to come in and buy something, you need something at your home or your business, let me know. We get a lot. All right? Anybody want to buy some stuff? Router server switches?
Raffle tickets.
Raffle tickets. Buy raffle tickets. Oh, I got the winning ticket in my pocket already. So it's really all you're doing is making a donation. I was assured by Chris that I have
No, he wasn't.
I want a lightsaber, right? I started watching Star Wars after the Jar Jar Binks fiasco. Anything else? Right? If you watch college football in NFL, we have TV commercials on preseason or pregame. The early game, I guess they call it early game or something. You know, check us out. If you see us, give us a shout out online. Say, hey, I saw your commercial type thing.
Can we watch it here?
Do what?
Can we watch the game? Come here and watch
Actually,
the game?
we can't watch the game here. Whoever does football or whatever. I live in a part of the world where we don't have like real internet. I have to use Wi-Fi, so I don't get a whole lot. Plus, my TV's not internet capable.
Well, then it's safe.
We could do it here, though, and we're going to do it here eventually. Any other questions? Buy some tickets, y'all. How about the chapter? All right. Thanks for that. I'll be right next door. If you give me the hand, the van is on the outside the store. Moving up left.
Head is military for restroom for those that don't get it.
I'm resting. You were rest. Although I always went, we're going to have couches in the back. I always been
Maybe one on the
not a Capital One, all of them. I won't say that. I was not all of them.
We are recording this, so.
So thank you everybody for coming. See a couple of new faces.
Not a lot.
So want to let you know a little bit about the chapter, what we do. And for those of you that have always been here, you're going to hear the same spiel. We started back in 2014 with a mission to foster the next generation of cybersecurity. At the time, there was nowhere for anybody with an interest in cybersecurity to meet, whether you had CICP certification or other type of security cert. There was nowhere to meet and gather and share knowledge. So to that end, we started a chapter where mission focused on ensuring that the next generation is there in the pipeline. To that end, we typically hold our meetings at education institutions. Technical institutions is considered an education institution from some perspectives because they do teach veterans how to use technology. So that's one of the reasons that we need it. Other meeting places that put down higher college, ECPI, you name an education institution, Chesterfield Technical Center, That's where we hold the majority of our meetings. We typically have a 2-hour meeting. The first hour is dedicated to some type of educational component. The second part is dedicated to chapter events, Jeopardy style game that we typically put on, and network. So it's
He's not on yet.
he's not.
He was traversing from one location to the other that has a better, secure, a more stable connection. So he'll be online. But you want to talk about?
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about the scholarship fund. Today we extended the deadline till when?
September 30th.
September 30th. We have that flexibility with ISC Square. The deadline was supposed to be tomorrow, but we were able to get it extended for another 30 days. Right now, we have $4,275. Our goal is $10,000. We are waiting for ATOS to pony up $5,000.
They've pledged 5,000, and we're just waiting on the PO and all of that fun stuff to get through the doors. But we're still on track for that. Yes.
So E Plus is also pledged another 500. So that will put us up to $975.
9775.
775. How much do we have to take?
About 50.
50? Yeah. Okay. So we're really close to our goal. If you can help us, any amount counts. If you can get the word out, if you can find a company that will donate any amount to the scholarship challenge, we would greatly appreciate it. That being said, we're one of the few chapters in the country that are participating in this.
The only.
The only. So from the start, when we started the challenges, we had given out 12 $1,000 scholarships. This
This will be the 4th year that we did it.
The 4th year? 2016. So since 2016, we have awarded 12 $1,000 scholarships. Hopefully this year we'll be able to award 10 1,000 scholarships in 1 year. And I am so proud of that. I'm so proud of this chapter for accomplishing that.
One thing to add to the donation, so the $10,000 goal is where we want to get to, but in order to cover some of the administrative fees that ISC Squared, the Center for Cyber Safety and Education, requires, there is $750 of everything that we earn, regardless of how much we raise. $750 goes back to the Center for Cyber Safety and Education. So really our goal is $10,750. The 750 is not represented there, but so that we can do an even number of scholarships. We really goes towards when the applicants start applying for the scholarships. There's a platform that they go out to. They have to submit a list of references. They have to do an essay. They have to answer a bunch of questions. So. And what the Center for Cyber Safety and Education does is they keep track once the committee has defined, keep track of that student that is going to be the recipient until they're ready to collect those funds, because in order, really not ready to accept those funds for another year or two, depending on where they are in their high school career. Education, or for cyber safety and education, keeps track of those students and then disperses those funds on our behalf. So that's But it is less money that we get to issue, but it's well worth its money, its weight. They also use some of that scholarships. So I know that we have at least one student in the room.
Oh.
But the chapter challenge, because you are not a high school junior or senior, if you go, this is the center's website, and go on to scholarships, there are we are participating in. I probably should have just clicked on a different one other than that. So undergraduate women's scholarship, graduate scholarships. The Hal Tipton is not on there, and I'm surprised at that, but the Hal Tipton, it might be in the undergraduate. The Hal Tipton one that they give out every year, for 2 years in a row, the recipient of that was a member of this chapter. Yes, Irwin. He got both of them.
True.
I actually wrote his letter of recommendation, so I think that might have something to do with it. But yeah, so there are other options as far as for folks that are still going to school and are interested in scholarship. This is a good way to do it. So the money that the $750, while a lot of it does go towards that administration portal, they also do provide additional funds towards their other scholarships. All right, so do you want to go into the other major announcement while I get Eric? He just emailed me and said he's on. So the other major announcement from our site, if I can find my mouse.
So we, the board, have been diligently working on a blockchain conference that's going to be hosted on October 18th at the Richmond Hilton. If you go to our website, you'll find the blockchain, and we are diligently working for this conference. Blockchain technology fundamentals, blockchain technology applications such as mortgage, and that's a big issue today, right? Protecting mortgage application. Consideration, blockchain technologies in operation, blockchain technology risk, including privacy, legislative activities, and potential impacts on users of blockchain technology. Compliance framework around blockchain and or cryptocurrency. Blockchain technology vulnerabilities and including security. Again, not a lot of thought is being given to how to secure the blockchain. Current development in cryptocurrencies, evaluation of blockchain technology applications, and your use case will be discussing at the conference.
And just to point out, cryptocurrency conference, this is a blockchain conference, so it will application process for folks that are studied on blockchain, but I think there's a misconception that cryptocurrency is the only thing that is using blockchain at the time. So the intent is to elaborate on that. So this conference was held last year. It was under a different name, and they've approached us to be the presenters so that it brings a little bit more credibility to it. although from my understanding, and I did not attend it last year, it went off really well. So I'm very interested to see who, we've still got a lot of the board from the last the chapter, so that we have a committee that's involved in getting the conference together. So this is the call for speakers, and then there's without going into a whole lot of detail as far as what each of those opportunities at the sponsorship levels brings. If you have a business and or are just interested, have a lot of money laying around and want to sponsor and you want to showcase your brand, there are various booth, name on the website, you have a LinkedIn page. I employ everybody to go out there and boost this number a little bit.
Yes, please follow.
So just don't do a Twitter search for hashtag RVABC. That is not us. That's somebody from Thailand. But LinkedIn, you'll be all right. I don't have a whole lot of control over that one, but we've looked at trademarking, and we have a logo, and it'll be put up on the site in a couple of days. That's going to be copyrighted and all that fun stuff, trademarked, trade dressed. So. No, because we don't have anybody. So if you'd like to run the chapter LinkedIn page, we would love to have one. But just like this one has kind of gone a little stale in the week that it's been up, I don't want that to happen to our official chapters website or LinkedIn page. So if we've got folks that can help keep content on the page, then we will develop one, but I just don't want it to go stale. All right. So, James, do you want to talk about the brochures for a few minutes while I try to get up with Eric?
So, just to keep interested in security, I did reach out to the Federal Trade Commission. They do publish quite a bit of material. They have information on data breach response, building secure, in the Internet of Things, chatting with kids about being online, and protecting your personal information. All these up here are available for you to take. If you're interested in your organization, getting these involved, we can order those for you. Also have some older reviewed seminar educational item sample tests from the CISP. Very interested in that. Bookmarks up here, as well as once you've signed in, we'll automatically submit your CPE credits for you as a member. But if you have other certifications that you need CPEs for outside of ISC Square, we have certificates up here that you just write your name in. We can use that.
I will say that if we do submit the CPE credits for you, it will take a couple of weeks before they show up in your profile. Because we have to submit them in bulk, and then ISC Square takes about 2 to 3 weeks to input them into your system.
We are aware that there was a delay. It was a 5-week delay, right? July and August, there was this is August now, June and July. There was a 5-week delay getting them from after John submitted them, they acknowledged yesterday that there was a delay, but that's been fixed. So we don't have that delay anymore. All right.
I'm in here for Amazon. Yeah. Okay.
Very good.
Okay. You can support us by going to smileamazon.com and selecting ISC2 space RVA as the charity. You order stuff, it will raise funds.
All right, one last item, and then we'll turn it over to Eric. The Board of Elections has been pushed off till September.
No, our normal annual meeting is in October, but we pushed it back to the November before Thanksgiving.
So we've already put together descriptions for all of the board positions. And
So where Ivan was going with that is we put together the description, the job descriptions, because that was a request from some of the nominating committee, is to have a list of what each of the job descriptions entails, so that when they start tapping folks to say, hey, would you be interested in a position, then that person knows what that position entails. So I do know that we are going to have some positions that will not be, the incumbent is not going to be running for that position again. So there will be some known vacancies, and then if you're interested in a position that one of us is going to continue to go for, then you can challenge it at that time. Is that for us or somebody else? Oh, okay.
all right, what was that?
I finished your sentence. No, I'm still, he says he's at the hotel and he's getting connected right now, so.
Okay, so I guess this meeting, we're doing it in the reverse. We're covering all of the chapter items first, and then Eric will take the. What else do we have to cover?
Great opportunity to come see me about travel tickets.
One more. The Jedi.
Challenges, VR game. So it's immersive. It is a really cool unboxing video. So if you want the opportunity to do an unboxing video on YouTube, it's still in the original plastic and everything else. It's brand new. Tickets. But I will say one of the challenges is if you think you're gonna let your kid give it to your kids, they need to have a cell phone with an app. And then they plug their cell phone in the headset. But they do have a really cool lightsaber, and there's a little portal on the ground. And I bought one for myself and for my kids. They love it. But they have to have my cell phone in order to work it. So that's the challenge.
Controlling factor. What kid doesn't have a cell phone? You're a bad parent. At least that's what society says now.
8 and 11. 20-year-old, obviously. But the 8 and 11-year-old, they have a tablet, they want to do something, they have no access to it.
Yeah, I got along just fine without a tablet or without a cell phone. I made it. All right, so Eric is on. Eric, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, have you sent me the presentation?
Yes, I have.
Awesome, I will refresh. Just a moment. And are you able to hear okay?
Getting a little bit of echo.
A little bit of background noise?
Echo. Do you have the speakers on or something? And the microphone on your laptop? If you can like mute me, the microphone was.
Yeah, I'll mute myself when you start talking.
All right.
Having a challenge driving. How do I put this into slide view? I think I got it. How do I make that full screen? Almost looks like I know what I'm doing. All right. Can you make me the presenter? How do we make me the presenter? Huh?
You're presenting.
Yeah, but the people on the, well, it's just me, Eric, and Michael. So we don't need to present. Okay. No, not log off. But, okay. All right. So, as has become abundantly clear, we were unable to get Eric to come on site tonight. Originally, that was the plan, but unfortunately, all of us have full-time jobs, and because he was so nice to volunteer to do this by Zoom, I took him up on that opportunity. This will be the first time that we've done this particular type of presentation from Zoom. Last time we tried to do it over a telephone, that didn't work out real well, so we're still learning, we're getting our feet under us, adopting this technology. So Eric Taylor is the Chief Technology Officer for ATOS. He's been with ATOS for about 2 years now. ATOS is currently the managed security service provider for the Commonwealth of Virginia, in addition to other STSs and suppliers that are providing all of the different services, IT services to the Commonwealth. So with that being said, I will pass it over to Eric, and I'm going to put myself on mute so that we don't have a lot of background noise.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. And I do apologize for not being able to be on site. Like Chris said, I did have to come out to a customer presentation meeting in Texas, unfortunately. That's what happens when you're in a company that tries to sell a bunch of security. Chris, I'm just going to tell you next slide as we go through. So Chris gave me an opportunity to present for you guys. I typically like to be there in person. I'm a very hands gesture type of guy and walking around. So I'll actually be doing that on my laptop and moving my hands around. You just won't be able to see me. So my topic today is to give you an overview of cloud security and the common attack vectors for cloud security and our responsibility as IT professionals or IT security professionals and what we need to do around cybersecurity. And then also talk about some of the capabilities in cloud security controls. So the cloud security challenge is not new. We've known many breaches in the news that have been existing that resulted in lots of data loss in the cloud. Here's some examples via APIs or cloud misconfigurations. Obviously, if you've not been aware that Capital One has been compromised to their cloud data because of some misconfiguration from third party. That's the rumor. And so, you know, these are not new vulnerabilities, but these are existing once they're amplified. A lot of these type of vulnerabilities on these ones on the left-hand side, the top 11, are ones that we would see typically inside of an IT environment, but now they're extended to the cloud. And so we're going to go through each one of those and talk about the impact and then where we can be good cybersecurity professionals to influence companies and influence our people, or just get the understanding of what we would need to do in the cloud. It's not hands off. So if we want to go to the next slide. So this is typically what happens in a cloud environment. This is what's called the shared responsibility security model. On the left-hand side is what typically somebody would have to do in a physical environment. This is actually your right, my left, or yeah, your left, because I'm looking straight at it, sorry. So, you know, at the physical layer, we're going to protect our data by putting guards on the door, making sure we're rack cages, those type of things. We own that as a company or as an IT professional providing security services, all the way up to the application layer, right, and the data that lives in the application. But when we move into the cloud model, you actually have 3 different types of clouds that, or cloud type of configuration or models. One is called IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service, where you're deploying VMs themselves and you're doing things like Windows OS or Linux OS in the cloud. The second one over is PaaS, where you're making the application work in the cloud as containers inside of operating systems that are managed by a cloud provider. And the last one is SaaS, where you're actually just using the applications themselves, like Dropbox or Gmail. Now, in between there's a new concept that lives on the SaaS side that's called serverless. It still fits into the SaaS model itself, where you're using APIs and just code in the cloud. So this is a typical model that you see. And each one of these in white is where, as cybersecurity professionals, we have to understand our responsibility. The cloud providers do not protect our data. They do not protect our authentication mechanisms. They give us the ability to do authentication, but the authentication itself is really depending on us and our security policies. Same thing with protecting that data. And when you're in a PaaS solution, you're protecting the Docker image or the image itself with specific type of security controls. And then when you're looking at the IaaS, you're looking at the operating system up. And so these traditional security things, as they relate down to our private infrastructure, we have to think about that new security challenge itself and who's responsible for what in the cloud and what technologies can extend to the cloud. And that's a big challenge. A lot of the on-premise technologies don't work and fit as well in the cloud. It's a different way that it's deployed, especially in the SaaS stuff. You're not going to be able to put antivirus in a SaaS environment. You're not going to be able to put antivirus in a container. There are very specific defenses that go into those things. And kind of this is what the picture is as you're looking at that shared security model and who's responsible for what. So everything in white is typically the customer's responsibility, and gray is in the cloud provider. So hopefully that makes sense. If there's any questions, I'm going to go through each one of these attack vectors as it relates to the cloud. And then we're going to talk about some controls that we would put in place to protect against each one of these areas where a customer is responsible for their data. And as security professionals, we would want to understand where that works. On the right-hand side is just some concepts of where that protection mechanism is. So CASBs or DLP or authentication mechanisms, IPS sensors, those type of things are on the right-hand side. There's a lot more in the cloud that to be talked about, and we're going to go through some of those, but those are just some of the areas where you would see typically lined up in, the protection at the top layer, which is the users, and that's identity access protection, or where we're putting data where we have to have encryption or DLP. So that's kind of how this slide plays out, is being able to articulate our responsibility and some of the control mechanisms as it relates to a private environment, and now that you're moving to the cloud. Next slide. So as we look at that, we're going to go through each one of these, and they're very high level bullet points. And Chris, you could probably share these out if you want, so that people can keep those. These are just some of the common attack vectors, all 11 of them that I had up at the beginning on slide 2. This one specifically about data breach, in the way that we were looking at this is, whose responsibility is it for security? In this case, a data breach, as we know from a Capital One breach, that both parties are. It's the cloud provider, the person who's making sure that those security controls are done. And you look at that security responsibility tile up on the right-hand side. And then the customer, right? So if the data is breached, where are the security controls in place by the cloud provider, and where are they in place by the customer? And this is applicable to the architecture when it comes to the infrastructure, the meta, the data itself, and the applications. And it's applicable to all three of those cloud service models. And our threat is right there highlighted in bold, spoofing the identity. So, somebody stealing that information and taking that identity asset, being able to use that somewhere else, tampering with the data, your reputation itself. The information is disclosed, obviously, if somebody stole that data, providing denial of service if it's stolen or encrypted with ransomware, and the ability to potentially elevate privileges and get further inside the environment is what this threat in the cloud looks like. And these are the areas where we would have to be concerned most about. So hopefully you get the gist of what I'm trying to convey in these major vulnerabilities that we have in the cloud. And also I'm going to go through all 11 of them with this context of who's responsible, where we're at in the architecture, where in the service models provided, and the threat that we're trying to mitigate. And then we're going to talk about the security controls that we can do in general. I can't see the audience. Is everybody nodding okay? And we're all getting it on the same page?
Yes, everybody's chomping at the bit. I actually advanced the slide deck so much, one slide, because everybody wants to see it so already.
I'm sorry. Right. So, yeah, it's hard to be remote and talk. So I guess that's one of the things we have to learn about Zoom. Maybe I should have a video of the audience too. Misconfigurations and inadequate change control. So, right. So what's conveyed here is that's really on the customer to understand is you're in charge of what you're putting in your cloud environment. The cloud provider's not. Misconfigurations being that you configure that infrastructure, and when you're setting those that compute environment up, you need to set it up correctly. You don't need to leave them vulnerable. And the same thing with inadequate change control. You need to understand who's making changes to your environment, and that's both applicable to stealing somebody's credentials, so credential theft, which I have another slide later on. But really, this is applicable to all three cloud service models. It's also applicable to all 4 elements in the architecture, and the customer is responsible for making sure their stuff is not misconfigured. The threat we have to deal with is, the tampering of the data, the reputation, the disclosure, and denial of service for that. And this is really that S3 bucket problem that people have been talking about, where by default, when the Amazon cloud was years ago stood up, by default, there wasn't any rule on an S3 bucket. An S3 bucket is a data storage container inside the Amazon environment. Think about it as a data store. And when any is configured on that bucket, that means anybody that signs up for an Amazon account. Me, you, for free, if we have an Amazon Prime, we could see those any configurations. Amazon thus must change that. Now it's not a default setting, but it's a configuration change that could still be set back. Gives you a nice pre-warning and say, hey, you're about to let this be open to the world. A lot of people thought before this attack vector came out from this misconfiguration was, any really means just my organization, right? So, I want everybody to be able to see my data to my organization, but it really meant any across the Amazon cloud. So Amazon put some controls in to fix that, but this can happen at any cloud provider. All right, next slide. So for this one, it's really like the understanding of the cloud security architecture itself and the strategy. It is very complex still. The technologies we're using and the technologies that are available for us to use in the cloud are still maturing. We're seeing companies like Palo Alto buy up left and right, smaller companies, Redlock, redriving their portfolio to be very cloud driven. So you're seeing these things being purchased because these companies didn't have the ability to build something new. So a lot of those smaller niche players are getting purchased and being rolled into a big platform like Palo Alto's solution. They now call Prism, which was a bunch of different small cloud security providers to roll this in there. So it's really the understanding of what you have to apply, where you have to apply, and what you actually have to do. And if you misunderstand that, it's customer responsibility. The customer is responsible. It's typically at the infrastructure layer where this occurs. It's typically at the PaaS and IaaS because the software as a service is not, it's controlled by somebody. You're not going to see that really. So it does happen, but it's not really applicable there when you're looking at it really in depth from an attack vector. And then spoofing the identity, tamper, reputation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privileges can happen if you don't understand it. And it is a common misunderstanding. And that's one of the reasons why we want to get educated on cloud security itself. Another point on this, though, is even the security controls and the SLAs that a cloud provider set you up for. Give you a perfect example. Office 365 and Microsoft in general has released about a year and a half ago. If you put anything as a proxy in between you and our cloud environment, you have no SLA. So they are totally against an endpoint client that goes on your workstation and proxying traffic so you can do detective controls before it gets to the cloud. And they came out and said that if you're going to go call us and troubleshoot, you're not going to get the same SLA that you would get if you were getting directly to Office 365. So there are some unique cloud solutions that don't do man in the middle, but able to protect like you are a man in the middle security control. And those are the typical CASB type solutions that are not agent based. So next slide.
Hey, Eric, so we have can you see the class? I put the video on and can you see it?
Yes, I can.
All right, so if you all want to raise your hand, that'll be an indicator that he wants to.
Eric, I have a question for you. So if I'm using Office 365 and I have carbon black on my endpoints, does that negate their SLAs?
You're not doing a proxy in the middle of it. Carbon Black's not doing a proxy. So I'm talking about if I'm putting semantics blue coat in the middle of it, even in web gateway, if I'm doing like a web proxy gateway, you're going to have an SLA problem. I've actually ran into that twice in the last 2 years. So what they recommend is that you bypass the proxy, you put specific configurations that bypass the proxy, and use a CASB, or use their Intune solution, which is their cloud security CASB.
Thank you.
All right, we're on the next slide.
All right. So looking at insufficient identity access control and key management. We'll talk in depth about this one because this is very important. And this is really being able to control your identity access management, who gets access to your cloud, and securing your cloud with encryption. And so customers responsible for it, happens at the infrastructure layer, is applicable to IaaS service where both of those key management can be done. Because I grouped key management in this one, and this is these are well-known ones. It's not me grouping them, but because the way that this is grouped from the industry experts about key management being the same thing as IAM together. Software as a service is applicable to IAM, but key management is typically hard to do when you're doing software as a service. So that's why that checkbox is not green right there. But you still have the same type of threats, right? Somebody could spoof your identity if you don't have the right identity management, two-factor authentication, those type of things that are set up. Tamper with your data if somebody can go and compromise your users by giving up credentials. Can ruin your reputation, obviously, disclose information, delete the information, denial service, and compromise an admin and elevate privileges. So if you're not doing proper IAM, right, identity access management, and you're not doing proper privileged access management, and you're not encrypting yourself in the cloud where you only own your keys, you're subjective to these type of threats. Next slide. So really in depth is that next slide is the account hijacking, which happens way too often. So that's not just the spoofing and credential theft, that's actually the man in the middle opportunities that are being used from a infrastructure. If you're not doing SSL, if you're password guessing, stealing credentials, those type of things. And that is both the cloud provider and the customer is responsible for that, because the cloud provider is the one that is setting up, if you're talking about a software as a service, the security controls that will allow you to do things like not having the ability to do clickjacking or any of the HTTPS man in the middle type of attacks. And these same type of threat events could be exploited against you. Next slide. And insider threat, it's another one that does happen quite often. Insider threat, not only from the fact that the insider is able to get to your environment, but neglect itself, right? So if you look at the 2018 cost of insider threat study, it also points out that it's neglect by accident, right? So root cause of 64% of incidents is the employee, contractor, the admin misunderstanding or clicking on links, being able to steal that information, being able to give up that asset credential for being able to get into that cloud. So the customer is fully responsible for being able to protect that. And it is applicable to all three service models in the cloud. The reason why from an infrastructure and not the application side, I mean, it could be applicable to the application side, but I'm prove who you say you are. Before it was, I just gave you a key and you used it. And if I get that compromised by, perfect example is you gave me an API key. I put it in my GitHub repository. I put it up on GitHub, and everybody else sees that key. They can start using that key to be able to get access to the cloud environment. So now that gets fixed with Oath 2.0, and there is a new way to do API keys where you're actually getting an API authorization key before you actually get the key, and that key itself expires. So it's a two-factor type of authentication into an API. So that's one attack vector, is not doing tokenization the right way, and the authentication and access control behind it, and making sure that they are monitored, that they're not poorly designed or abused themselves. So another one, good one, is abuse of APIs by doing denial of service, by causing other people denial of service. And I think I might not have that. Sorry, I didn't have that one highlighted, but it should have been highlighted because that is a known one. So abusing APIs, and there's some technologies out there that will fix that for you by being able to watch how long and how fast somebody uses an API itself for. Next slide. So the next slide, hopefully you're seeing, is the weak control plane. So weak control plane, not just from the back end itself, but from DevSecOps or DevOps itself without the sec in the middle. So think about, you want to be able to push code to the cloud, and you want to do that in an automated fashion. Typically, we have what's called CI/CD. So being able to write code, check it into a GitHub repository, go through testing and development environment, then go through user acceptance testing. Everything passes its control, or everything passes user acceptance, and we think the application is good, and then pushing that to the cloud without any understanding of the security configuration and how the data flows itself. And it can lead to weaknesses and blind spots. And that's really the customer's responsibility and infrastructure for the things that you're managing. And it can lead to the spoofing, reputation, information disclosure, and elevation of privileges threats. Next slide.
We're there.
All right. So I actually was like, I never heard that word, Apple structure, but it is a cloud type of word and a metastructure. And so that's what the cloud providers are giving you access to, and what they're allowing you to do from an API and an automation. So typically this is what we call Kubernetes, being able to go and deploy stuff in an automated fashion. Now, if those service providers break those, or you misconfigure your interaction with the metastructure, sure that but then in general. So hopefully you understand that part of it. It is interaction between both the cloud provider and the customer, and understanding how the infrastructure itself is presented to you. Next slide. So this is the, wow, I actually have two more. This is very long. Sorry guys, it's probably boring as hell for you. Hopefully not. So thinking about what we actually do as an organization and what people do as an organization, and there's a lot of different cloud providers out there. If you think about GitHub, it's a cloud provider, and people use that as a code repository. Or then think about Box, it's a cloud provider. So misunderstanding of the cloud uses of an environment can lead to compromise, and misunderstanding of the customer relationship with the cloud provider. Right. So if I'm in an HR department, I want to move all my stuff to HR in the cloud. Is it authorized for the HR department to do it? It may make their job easier, but having that ability to go and detect making sure that you can apply those right system controls to the cloud itself is that what we call shadow IT, which is the cloud stuff that's happening that the company IT department doesn't know about, so they can't secure it. And so there's a couple key main challenges to that, and it's both on the cloud provider side of saying, okay, making sure I have the right contractual language in there, and I'm providing you with the right visibility, what you need to see, right? So providing you with the right logs, providing you right the access control and being able to do those things from a cloud provider perspective to customers. And the opposite is the customers knowing what's actually going to the cloud and who's using it. A perfect example, there's a well-known PDF to Word converter that in their documentation basically says anytime you upload a Word document, there's the tool works great, but that is a bad cloud provider, giving that it's actually really hidden down in the terms and conditions. So the cloud provider is doing stuff to keep your intellectual property, and a lot of people use that because first thing they Google is how do I get a PDF to a Word document because I want to take all the text and be able to redo it myself, right? So they upload it and then boom, it's compromised. And so, and the cloud provider is saying, the minute you upload it, I keep that intellectual property because you gave me the authorization to do it when you said I accept, right? So that's that, cloud usage and what it means to be used in the environment. Next slide.
So Eric, on that slide, it says the concept is broken down into 2 key challenges. Is that on the next slide, or is there?
Yeah. So the next slide is about the abuse and nefarious use itself.
Okay.
Yep. And for some reason, I have that slide twice. I had 14 and 15 slide, and I'm looking at this slide deck on me too. Was the 2 key concepts, and one was the nefarious use of cloud services and use of them, right? So being that malicious actors can leverage a cloud compute environments to attack you. And then being able to do things like, as I was saying, malicious actors could be a company that's going to steal all the information they want from you just by you saying yes to the terms and conditions, or they're using the cloud environment to host malware, right? So there's been very, very well-known examples of AWS hosting malware. Well, what does an incident response individual do when they're going through and saying, okay, I want to go and block all malware. Am I going to block AWS? Probably not, because you're probably going to block legitimate services. So that's the abuse and nefarious use of cloud services, both from an attack and malware perspective, but then also to, my terms and conditions allow me to soak up all your information. So you can actually skip the next slide, because I think I might have just copied the slides to keep the template the same. And we can go to the slide that talks about, so what do we solve? What are we trying to solve? And then the questions and some of the technologies that we're using. So if I look at this, there's these key security technologies that are very 50,000 foot level. You can actually go into these and break these down a little bit more. But CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker, and really this gives you the visibility and control of sanctioned and unsanctioned apps that are going to the cloud, and access control into those sanctioned apps. So some CASB providers will both not only say, I have every piece of traffic via firewall log, and I can tell you where you're going, and then I can tell you from a block perspective to prevent you from getting there from an unsanctioned. But then also from a sanction, when somebody goes there, how do I make sure that their person is getting authenticated the right way? They're getting information. So you typically see in the CASB department both identity access management handoff to something like Okta or to identity provider, and the ability to do DLP controls in CASB, so you're protecting the information that's posted to the cloud. Another key component of CASB, a good CASB provider, is also being able to block cloud-to-cloud problems. So there's a very key concept about the abuse of cloud is, if I put information inside the cloud, I can actually share it between Box and OneDrive by creating a link. And somebody can go in and say, okay, I'm now taking it from OneDrive to Box. Cloud-to-cloud problem is very, very big for being able to protect that information. You may sanction somebody putting your company's PII or your company's confidential information in Box. But if you can't control somebody sharing out that link, or sharing out that link with somebody that's a OneDrive user, or taking that link and sending it to G Drive, right, and you're coming from Box. So that's typically where that CASB solution works, is at that space, both being able to protect from a DLP, right, that allows prevention, not just looking at the data itself and classification of data, but then how do I control it, and how do I control it between sharing between cloud providers. That's where that space lives. In that middle bucket there of the cloud workload protection, container security, cloud security analytics, and this is really how do I secure my data center in the cloud without impacting the ability to do adjuvant things in the cloud. And so those are the controls from a cloud workload protection. That's CWP. That's the typical term that's used of traditional antivirus that is put on the IaaS side. So that's deploying antivirus, next-gen antivirus, EDR type of tools in a workload that's in the cloud that's in the IaaS. But when you move to PaaS itself, which is the next container security, you're actually looking for container security runtime defenses. It's a different concept. You're not sticking antivirus in there. You're putting things in there that are actually looking at the code and the code dependencies, because that's what a container is all about, is being able to run microprocessing services on almost like a VM on an operating system, but you're not protecting it with your traditional antivirus. So you have to have very specific controls around container security. A lot of security vendors today, Trend Micro is being one that's well known, and who knows where Broadcom is, Symantec, but they're kind of getting there. And then Carbon Black and CrowdStrike have good container security controls for container security itself. And the next one over, Cloud Security Analytics, is actually looking at the SaaS side of it and the API side. So when we're looking at API abuse, you're typically going to look for a Cloud Security Analytics control that's going to be looking at the API. Apogee is one that Google offers that is looking at very specifically how that API is being used, providing analytics about, somebody may be abusing this API, or somebody may be abusing your SaaS service, because I'm seeing those type of controls. In the middle is, how do I actually do all this work in the cloud and extend it to my own premise? And so a managed cloud provider of security services, or the cloud providers themselves, will typically have the ability, but not necessarily looking at across multiple clouds. So being understanding that sometimes you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, like AWS. A lot of companies are now looking at being able to have AWS and Azure at the same time, or Google and Azure at the same time, and being able to do that across the platforms. Each one of these, AWS, Google, and Azure, have what's called native security controls, right? AWS has a native firewall. They have a native web application firewall. They have native logging in their environment. But you can't extend those controls that you're getting in AWS to Google Azure. So how do you go and do that across with a single pane of glass, being able to understand the relationships and the maps together? That's where you're typically going to look at a cloud provider security service, whether it's managed or you're doing it yourself, that extends across all three of those cloud platforms. And the next bucket is at the application identity access management. Is, I want to retain control who has access to my data and where it's being located at. And that's cloud encryption services and cloud identity access management. Google does a really, really good job of encryption. Everything is encrypted. All the VMs by default, you don't have to change anything for Google, but they own the keys. And so if you don't own the keys, you don't have true access to your data. And I have an in-depth slide to talk about that. And so that's that middle, question. How do we solve? What are we looking to solve? And the last one is, I want to ensure my DevOps pipeline, or what I'm putting in the cloud from an application side, is secure, right? And so there is DevSecOps, right? The sec being security testing in the middle of being able to program something and automatically put it in the cloud from the day that I program to go through all my testing to be able to put it in the cloud, and doing security testing in the middle of that is DevSecOps. And across the bottom is our posture management. And so there's a couple of really good companies, Twistlock, Aqua, that do very, very specific things. Twistlock got bought by Palo Alto, so I think that's off the market now, but they're coming under the Palo Alto's Prism solution. And so really these are, what are my cloud risks itself? And am I still compliant with my security posture? And so that's where that goes across all the cloud workload, cloud security, the analytics, looking at the CASB, making sure it's configured right, making sure that your cloud encryption posture and identity access management are done right, and being able to test your code. And so that's cloud security posture management. So these are the types of questions we're trying to solve with the solutions that you want to put in place, right? So if we look at our shared responsibility, it really depends on where we're at, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, what security controls, but they all have similar questions. as we went through workload container security and security analytics, you still have to ask the question, am I secure? Is my data secure in the cloud? Right? So being able to answer those questions is what we want to do when we're looking at controls. Next slide.
We're there.
All right, so some of these solutions, if we really look at them, the security controls themselves, go down the left across this area of responsibility. So instead of looking at it from the left to right, we're looking at it top down and where they apply. But if you look at two key components that I'm going to talk in depth next about is encryption, identity, access, right? So if no matter where we put our data, whether it is IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, got to make sure that if we want to make sure our sensitive data is controlled, applying encryption services and identity services to them. If we're using cloud provided services, it could get compromised. So this is a picture that looks at it from left to right and in potential areas where you would have to look in depth. So we go to the next slide. And so really this is how you would want to control that from a top-down level. So our most sensitive data or secret is on the far right and all data on the far left. And you know, if you don't care about that data, it's not really sensitive on the far left, use the default cloud HSMs and the key management systems and the cloud IAMs, right? So that's where you would want to put some dev stuff in there, and identity access management be controlled by going to Google and signing up for their account using the Gmail account by default. And by default, Google has encryption services that they manage and on their HSM. Azure has a very similar setup for theirs. AWS has a very similar. And the more that you want to control your data from the left to the right, from being all data, internal data, sensitive, and secret data, is the more you want to control those two key items. And the key items is the ability to encrypt and ensure your keys are properly maintained in HSM, hardware security module, and being able to do key management yourself. And then you also have to own the identity access management. So if you really fully trust your data and it needs to be secure, it's a full trust model and you need to be secure, you need to own both the KMS, key management itself, and IAM, and it's optional to use an HSM, which if we're looking at type of banks environments and where we want to be very secure, putting that on a hardware security module that if anybody broke into that, your data center that you're owning is not in the cloud premise, steals those keys, that they could be never used again because they can't open up the module itself, the HSM. So cloud providers give you the ability to do this today. They give you the ability to do data itself, encryption, where you can use their keys or you can use your own, or IAM. So if we go over to the next slide. And this is typically how that identity access management is done. So you have users anywhere, on-site, remotely, make a request to a SaaS provider. This is the model where you're not getting in the middle. The SaaS provider then asks for proof of identity, right? So you're going to an IAM service, which can be deployed in the cloud or on premise, and then you're getting authentication. And then the identity provider is providing the information back to the SaaS provider, and you're getting access. So instead of using Google's Gmail system and their authentication system, you actually use them yourself, whether it's IAM in the cloud and you deploy cloud solution to do that, or you're using your own that you're plugging in as through the cloud. So Okta is a perfect example. Okta is a cloud provider, but they're doing identity access management. But a part of that is typically you're calling the users in an Active Directory on the inside of your network. So you control access to those. A person gets removed or disabled. Once they get removed in your Active Directory, the SaaS provider, you can no longer get access. And this is preventing somebody from being able to go through and leave the company and still getting access to stuff in the cloud. It's preventing from somebody being able to do things like stealing credentials. If you identify that person, you can automatically disable them without going to each one of those SaaS providers individually and disable those. So this is the ability to provide your own identity. And if you provide your own identity, then you don't have to worry about the cloud provider getting access to your environment. Oh, but you also have to worry about the data as it is at rest and in the cloud environment. So that's the next slide. So by the combination of both providing your identity solution, identity management solution, controlling the accounts, controlling what gets in, and also controlling the encryption, you have full data sovereignty and control. Both of those two pieces are very, very important. You still have to have all the other security controls around it. But then if you're looking at laws of sovereignty, of being able to make sure that you own access to it, that you don't have internal data leakage, that you don't want Google being able to get to your data as a competitor, right? Google is very notorious about taking data and using that for their advantage in ads and those type of things. So if you wanted to, have Google, as Google being as a competitor as an example, but if you didn't want to have Google have access to that, you're going to want to take those controls. So they have this concept of BYOK, bring your own key, and then you add on buckets of HSM and being able to encrypt that. You're taking from default the customer managed keys to bringing your own key and having fully encrypted storage buckets in the cloud, whether the storage themselves, the storage buckets being the S3 buckets or the VM encryption. So if you look from the low-high side of it and the agility to trust model, you add in both the encryption and the identity, you're providing access control for your data in the cloud. Next slide. And if we really take a closer look at this, typically the way this is deployed is a key management system on your site, on your premise, where you have access to the keys, LDAP access, and then you're securing your BYOK to these key providers. So if you look at, you're doing this on site, on premise, and you're using both keys, if on the left-hand side, if we're going through a Docker image or through VMware, you can actually do this on site. You could do this in the cloud. You can do this in a cloud SaaS service. And sometimes the CASBs themselves allow you to control your own keys by being in the middle of that. And these are examples of the solutions that are integrated with key management solutions. So both identity and key management gives you data sovereignty. Still have to have the controls around it. It's the weakest part in there. But if somebody compromises your infrastructure, if they can't get access to the data because it is encrypted, then they can't get access to the data. If they can't get access to the identity because you're doing two-factor or step-up authentication and you're getting a lot of, I'm going from all data to sensitive data and I'm doing step-up authentication based off of that, somebody's going to get prompted for two-factor somewhere. They're not going to get access to that. So hopefully it gives you a good overview. This is the last slide, by the way, of the common attack vectors, the share of responsibility model, some of the solutions to think about and where they're applicable in the environment. And to me, the most important ones are both identity and data encryption itself. Any questions?
So Eric,
This makes sense to you guys?
Eric, can you talk, how do you go about as far as selecting a cloud provider, and are there certifications that you might look at for that cloud provider to kind of get a feeling that they're taking care of the data that you're putting out there?
Well, yeah, so think about FedRAMP, which is a well-known federal verification that a cloud provider is meeting all the federal requirements if you're talking about the federal side. The problem with FedRAMP is that it's a very, very long run cycle. And not only you have that, so you can go to a FedRAMP AWS environment, Azure, and Google. Or FedRAMP basically means that they're meeting all the federal requirements. They're doing both the physical, the operational, policy, procedures, technical controls to enable them to do FedRAMP. So they're getting authorizations to be able to share that federal data between federal agencies. They're doing the right controls. Very similar type of controls. There's a whole cloud certification process that vendors go through. Problem with FedRAMP and solutions around that not all security solutions are FedRAMP. So if we're thinking about Tenable in the cloud, Tenable has what's called Tenable IO, where they're doing vulnerability data in there. They're not in a FedRAMP certified environment. So your SaaS provider also has to be FedRAMP if we're looking at federal data. Same thing with being able to do the cloud certification process. There's a whole cloud certification process of being going out there and being able to get cloud certified and authorization to say, and typically those are like the SOC 2 audit type things. There's a very specific names. I'm not very familiar with them. I just know that our data centers, when we go to the cloud, the company I work for, we partner with Google, and we know exactly what those certifications that they do. Unfortunately, I'm not a compliance person. I'm a technical person, so I really can't answer that, except for on the FedRAMP side. And I know the FedRAMP is way, way more expensive than the standard security controls, but there are really good security controls. These companies would not exist. AWS, Azure, and Google would not exist going through this if they did not pass a certification and attestation of their environment and have third-party auditors. There is a whole process behind it. I know that for sure. I just don't know what it is, so I can't answer that question in confidence, but I do know that there's a process behind it.
Risk management, so that's part of it.
Yeah, but it's
So the one that I'm familiar with is the SOC 2 Type 2.
yeah. Is there any, so DoD has an engineering authority to get the scope of authority to operate PTO. And there's, everything. I feel like the process is followed. The whole process goes through. There's a chief owner, so they go through a whole list of. But you have to prove, show audit, and you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing this, you're doing that. Because even today, I went through the whole. I had to train somebody that some of your stuff doesn't actually track what software, what updates is pushed. Because they want to screenshot of the report and stuff. So it's pushed out. It's just, you know, some security analyst, here's someone doing.
You get a screenshot of something.
Yeah. It's kind of just like, you know what it's called? It's I even phone call find out.
When you find out, it'll come to you, right? Eric, are you able to hear? So the question, the comment that we just heard was from the back of the room. Are you able to hear that okay?
No.
No? Okay. I won't summarize it because I don't think I would do it any justice. Any questions, comments, insights?
Did anybody learn anything? No, I see you shaking your head. No, there's nothing new here. Everybody knew all the shared responsibility problems we have.
I like that round green emblem in that middle box offset. Circuit. That's interesting. I pick on that one because that's an ATOS product.
On which one?
The circle, the green circle that says circuit in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
So normally this is where we would present you with a challenge coin, but this is your second time presenting and you're in Texas. So let's say thank you to Eric, so if we can give him a round of applause. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close the slide deck?
No, I just hope that somebody got something out of it, that I didn't present anything that was old news.
I would ask, if you don't mind, the 2 points that you made about where denial of service was not highlighted, and then there was another one. Well, I guess I could probably modify the deck if I needed to, but if you make any changes to the deck, could you send them to us so we can put them out on our user portal?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go and attribute a couple of the areas to make sure I have good attribution to the original content on a couple of these. There's maybe 2 or 3 of them that I want to make sure I highlight where the source came from. It's very important we do that. And then I'll clean up the ones to get slide 14 that was a duplicate.
Appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to stop letting you look at me on the screen.
All right, thank you guys. I'm going to drop off and go to dinner with company folks.
Thank you, Eric.
Appreciate it.